Go ahead and hop into 13. For my folks who've passed the ITF, a lot of this will be review, but they'll introduce some new concepts as well. Chapter 13, we're dealing with security. Topics here are going to be security threats, security procedures, securing Windows workstations, wireless security, and then again, basic troubleshooting process for security. So start with security threats. Collectively, your security threats are referred to, many of your security threats, are referred to as malware, which is short for malicious software. Even though they vary widely, they all have in common that there's going to try to do something malicious. They're trying to contaminate or maybe destroy data on a system. Malware is typically installed on a computer without your knowledge, and once it's there, it's going to do things like try to change configurations, delete things, or corrupt information on your hard drive, steal information from you, or try to open up additional windows on the computer, or redirect the traffic on from your web browser. One class of malware, or two classes of malware, called viruses and Trojan horses. Viruses are probably the oldest form of malware there is, and they kind of work the same way viruses work in the real world. They infect a person, and then they use that. Viruses in the real world infect a person, and they use that person as a host. Viruses in computers infect a computer, and they use that computer as a host in a way to jump off of that host and onto another computer that they can then infect. The important thing to remember about viruses is that they don't replicate themselves. They need some type of human interaction in order to infect the system and in order to propagate themselves to another system. So what that might look like is, a virus infecting your computer, and then maybe you click on a virus in an email, and then it infects your computer, and then maybe it hijacks your email client, and then emails itself to a bunch of people in your list. Those recipients don't necessarily get infected just because they received that email. It's not until they interact with it and click on it and open up the attachment, that's when the virus actually infects them. So viruses need some type of human interaction in order to propagate. Trojan horses are similar, but they take a different approach. Trojan horse malware pretends to be something that is not, similar to the Greek myth about the Trojan horse, where the Greeks were trying to get into the city of Troy, and they couldn't get in because the walls were too high. So they built this giant horse, and they hid inside of it. And then the Trojans thought they had left, that they had retreated, and they brought the horse in because they thought it was a gift to the gods. And then that night, the Greek soldiers come out of the inside of the horse. They open up the gates to let the rest of their army through, and then they take everybody out. That's how Trojan horse programs work. They masquerade as something that's useful, a game, pirated software, something that you want. But the real tricky part about Trojan horse software is that it typically works. Like if it's a game, the game actually works. You're playing a game, but in the background is installing software or stealing information from your computer while you're playing that fully functional game. Other types of malware include adware. Adware is kind of falls into this category called grayware, where it's not necessarily malicious, because really what it really is doing is just giving you pop-up advertisements. So there's plenty of times where you see pop-up advertisements from legitimate companies. But the goal for adware is to try to get you to, purchase some product. Malware may use adware as a way to get you to click on and download some fake, product that they're advertising, but there are legitimate purposes for adware too. Ransomware is a type of malicious software that takes something that was meant for good and makes it work for bad, and that thing is encryption. In this case, we use encryption to protect our data from being, taken and viewed by somebody who's not supposed to have access. But with ransomware, what they do is they deliver some type of malicious code they get you to run on your system, and then it encrypts your data, but it gives them the key. So now they hold the key for ransom and until you pay, and then they may give you the key to unlock your data if they're honest criminals. The next is a rootkit. A rootkit, these ones are really hard to detect. It's basically like a backdoor access to your computer system. It's a set of tools that an attacker might get onto your system so that they can gain admin level access. And they'll just stash them there. It's hard to find them unless you have the right scanners on your computer. Spyware is going to be similar to adware. It's not necessarily malicious. It might just be gathering information so that a company can advertise to you, but it could also be gathering information to send off to a cyber criminal so that they can plan an attack against you. But essentially, the spyware will collect information from your web surfing habits and how you're using your system and send that information off to a third party. And then worms. Worms are similar to viruses. They have some of the same goals, corrupt the system, change configurations, things like that, except a worm doesn't have to rely on human interaction in order to propagate itself. Instead, a worm can hang out on a network and wait for a vulnerable host to appear, and then it'll infect it and then do whatever malicious activity it was designed to do. So just like worms in real life, a worm, like a tapeworm or something like that, can sit in the grass, wait for an animal to eat the grass, and then infect it. So it can lay in wait. So worms can be devastating because they just lay in wait for the right, unprotected device to connect to the internet, and then they jump right on it. Your anti-malware programs are designed to deal with many of these known malicious software. They refer to them as anti-malware because they're not just antivirus anymore. They used to be just antivirus, but now they're antivirus plus anti-spyware plus ransomware. They can block a lot of different things and identify a lot of different types of malicious software. In order to keep them up to date, there's a couple different methods. The most basic method is to do download anti-malware signatures, which are basically code patterns that have been identified in different types of malicious software. And then they take those code patterns and they use it to write almost like a virus definition. It's like a vaccine, if you will, against that type of malicious software. Those virus definitions get released on a regular basis because new viruses come out every day. So you have to make sure that as part of your routine maintenance, you're downloading those new antivirus definitions so that you're protected against the latest and greatest malware. There's also what they call heuristic malware identification, where even if a virus definition isn't known, the anti-malware system can detect suspicious behavior and then try to block certain activities accordingly. So basically it can learn based on the behavior of different software whether or not that software is trustworthy or not, and then it can take action. Uh, New malware is always being developed. Just mentioned that a second ago. Therefore, anti-malware software has to be updated on a regular basis. And you're going to get those updates typically from your manufacturer's websites. Uh, a lot of your antivirus software can connect to the manufacturer's website directly. So just from the console of your anti-malware software, there'll be, if you hit the update button, it knows to connect to that company servers and pull down the virus definitions. In a corporate environment, it might not be set up like that. You might pull your virus definitions from some internal server, but that server probably got its definitions from the main company's website. To remediate an infected system, so the malware gets past your anti-malware solution somehow, and now you need to get that malware off of the system and off your network. So first thing you're going to do is, once you detect that infected system, you're going to try to quarantine it. You're going to unplug any network cables, turn off the Wi-Fi, and then you start your work of trying to identify the virus and remove it. This might require you to reboot the system into safe mode. Definitely you're going to turn off, keep it disconnected from the network. You're going to run scans on it. You might have to allow the operating system to be reinstalled, because that might be the only way to 100% clear it off. If you have restore points, those could potentially help as well, because you can roll back to a point before that application or whatever was installed, that malware application was installed. But you're going to take some steps, however, to try to clean it off and then get the system back to a restored state. And that all starts by quarantining it. You got to get it, basically force it to be a standalone computer and keep it from connecting to the network until you can get it cleared. All right, attacks. When you're being attacked, the network is a big target. Attackers are looking for information about your network, about the target, and in order to kind of get this information on who they want to attack, they can do things like Google searches, who is lookups, and they can use other tools to do reconnaissance on you to basically gather information about their target. Another way they might use the network, might learn about your network, is through ping sweeps, which basically ping every open IP address on your system to see if they get a response back, because then that's going to tell them how many devices are on your network and what their addresses are. Attackers will determine which services are available by using port scanners. So there's tools that you can download off the internet, or might even be built into your operating system if you got like Linux, called Nmap and SuperScan, that can look for open ports. And remember, ports are associated with different protocols. Different protocols have different inherent security flaws in them. So by scanning for different ports, I might be able to identify an insecure port, and then that sets the attacker up for a list of things that they might be able to use in order to exploit your system. Attackers run vulnerability scans to discover the type of applications and OSs running on their targets. So one of the most popular vulnerability scanners is called Nessus, but there's some other ones too, like this Nippert and Sakuna. But these tools, they will look for the apps that you have on your computer or on your network, and then they'll list out known vulnerabilities that those different applications have. These are all tools, mind you, that are meant for protecting and securing your network, but attackers can use those same tools to try to identify issues with your network if they can get access to scan your network. And attackers attempt to discover vulnerable services to exploit by using tools like Metasploit and Core Impact. So again, those services, those programs that run in the background of your system, they might be able to be hacked. So they have tools that can identify their weaknesses. Different types of attacks that you might experience when it comes to TCP/IP. Attacks against TCP/IP will include denial of service attacks and distributed denial of service attacks. They both are attacks against availability. They're trying to make it so that you can't get legitimate access to a resource like a website. They just do it in slightly different ways. The denial of service attack is going to be one system trying to overload another system with illegitimate traffic so that legitimate users can't get access to that service. So basically, you're trying to use one system to offline another system so that people can't get to it. The distributed denial of service attack, or the DDoS attack, is going to be one target still, but there's going to be hundreds or thousands of devices all targeting that attack, all targeting that one system. So being able to overwhelm the system is easier because now you got like 1,000 machines all targeting that one machine. The next is DNS poisoning. So remember, DNS does the host name or the domain name to IP address correlation. With DNS poisoning, what they'll do is they'll attack your DNS server and they'll change that correlation. Instead of google.com going to the proper IP address for a Google server, google.com will go to the IP address of some server that the attacker has set up. And every time you type in google.com, it'll point you to their fake server. Or maybe it's like your bank account. Maybe it's like bankofamerica.com. Instead of going to its actual IP address, now it goes to the IP address of the attacker's server, where they have a website that looks like bankofamerica.com, so they could trick you into typing in your bank credentials. So that's an attack to look out for. And then man-in-the-middle attack. This is when an attacker inserts themselves in between a communication from your system to a remote system. Keep going with our bank issue, that won't work. You're communicating with a remote server, but an attacker inserts themselves in the middle of that network session, and they capture your traffic on its way to the remote place. They maybe copy it or read it, and then they forward it along to the its real final destination. So to you think you're communicating directly with that remote system, but all the while there's a third party in the middle of that conversation intercepting your communications. A replay attack is when an attacker captures the authentication packets. So like when you first try to connect to a remote system, it's going to prompt you. It's going to authenticate you. It's going to want to know your username and password. Well, the attacker captures that username and password as you're sending it to the remote system you're trying to authenticate to. They then pass it along to that system so you can get in. But after your communication session is over, they use your credentials to your authentication packet to re-authenticate to that system so that they can get in. Spoofing is kind of a broad attack. You can spoof a lot of different things, but spoofing just means to pretend to be somebody else that you're not. So you can, example they give here is spoofing IP addresses so that you can make your system look like another system based on using that other system's IP address. And then that can potentially give you access to resources. And then a SYN flood is a type of denial of service attack that exploits the TCP three-way handshake. That three-way handshake is the setup that TCP devices make before they actually start transmitting information. Remember we talked about the TCP versus UDP. I mentioned that UDP is rude. It just comes in a room and starts talking. TCP is very polite. It says, hey, Can I talk to you? And it waits for the device to say, yes, you can talk to me. And then it says, yeah, let's start talking. That, and from a packet perspective, that those packets go, um, what are packets? Send, acknowledge, send, acknowledge. So send, a send packet, a SYNACT packet, and then another ACK packet. Um, what happens during that setup though for a send flood? Uh, the device, the attacker, sends a request to open up a communication session. Your system acknowledges that, but then they never send the last packet to set up the communication. They just leave you. They just leave the other system hanging, waiting for a response. And they do that over and over and over and over again in rapid succession, so that your system gets overwhelmed, sitting there waiting to hear back, waiting for the call back, but the callback never comes. And because there's so many open packets, it's waiting for so many callbacks, it doesn't have the bandwidth to do anything else but wait for responses. And that triggers a denial of service. Now legitimate communication attempts have to get put on hold because all these open, half open TCP three-way handshakes. Of all attacks, the 0 day and the 0 hour are probably the most hard to defend against. A 0 day attack is an attack against a previously unknown vulnerability. So like nobody even knew that this application or system had an issue that could be taken advantage of until the day somebody took advantage of it. So that means what that means is there's no patches for it. So there's really no protection against it. A 0 hour, that's the moment that unknown, that 0 day attack was actually exploited. So you can have 0 day vulnerabilities that exist, but nobody's figured out a way to weaponize them. So the goal of most researchers is to try to find these, security researchers is try to find these 0 days and then make a patch for them before somebody malicious finds out about them. But the minute somebody malicious finds out about that 0 day and they figure out how to weaponize it, that's when it becomes a 0 hour exploit. To protect against all these different network attacks that we mentioned, there's not really one solution. You got to have to implement a lot of different solutions to protect against them. Specifically those 0 day attacks, because you don't even know what they are. One of the things that you're going to implement, though, one of the approaches you're going to implement is called defense in depth. Defense in depth means taking this layered approach to security, where you have multiple hurdles that an attacker has to jump over in order to get access to your system. You're not just going to have, anti-malware software. You're going to also have a firewall, and then you're going to also have, anti-spyware, and then you're going to layer all these security solutions up on top of each other, and that way you can potentially frustrate the attacker from going after you. Because you can never 100% get rid of all your security vulnerabilities, but you can make it so hard. You can harden your system to the point where you become such a hard target that they don't want to bother with you. Another kind of category of attacks is social engineering. The networking ones that we looked at, they were more technical attacks. Social engineering is really an attack against people. It's trying to manipulate them into giving up information that they wouldn't typically give up. So really, social engineering is nothing new. People have been scamming, since the beginning of time. Now they're just scamming you to get digital information so that they can, steal your identity or impersonate you. So some of the different social engineering techniques are pretexting. So that's when an attacker pretends to need your personal data to confirm the identity of the recipient. So like, in order to, verify that I should send you this $1,000 check. I'm just going to need your social security number and whatever. So that's pretexting. Phishing is when they send out fraudulent emails that look like they came from a trusted source. And those emails will be baited, right? And they're not sending these emails to anybody in particular. They're just throwing them out there for anybody who's going to bite. So it's just like fishing in real life. Go to a lake or whatever. You put a worm or some bait on the hook, and you just cast it out into the lake, and you just wait for some fish to bite. You feel a bite on it, then you hook them and you reel them in, and then you get your reward, whatever. You caught that fish. Same thing's true of phishing attacks. There's nobody who is targeted at. It's just a tasty bait that could attract anyone, and they wait for the bite, and then they try to reel you in to get whatever information they were trying to get from you. Spear phishing is a bit more directed, right? So spear phishing, just like in spear phishing in real life, you actually get in the water when you spear fish, and you're looking at a group of fish, and you like, I'm about to get one of these fish, and you stab it with a spear, and then now you captured your prey. Spear phishing in technology is similar to that. There's a smaller group of individuals you're trying to go after. Maybe they all work for the same company. Maybe they're all part of the same organization. So when they're crafting that bait, it's going to be more targeted, right? So like company bonus, they make a fake email that says new company bonus structure for company XYZ. The person who's a part of that organization, company XYZ, will be more tempted to click on that, to open it, because it has something specifically to do with their group. So that could be another type of attack. Spam is unsolicited email, and those emails will contain harmful links, malware, deception. So spam is like a frequent way that viruses get propagated. They'll send you the spam. They'll try to tempt you into clicking on something, and then you download some malicious software onto your computer. These, mind you, these techniques aren't used exclusively. It's not like phishing is used by itself and spam is used by itself. They use spam for the most part to deliver phishing emails. They don't just send that phishing email to one person. The way they get it out to 15,000 people is through spam mail. Something for something is another technique. That's when the attacker requests personal information in exchange for something. Like, hey, again, you $1,000 gift card, but I need your social security number to verify you're the right person. Bait. That's when an attacker leaves a malware infected flash drive in a public location. Sometimes they call those rubber duckies. They just like put some malicious software on a bootable flash drive and just drop it in a parking lot, and then you walk in, oh, I found a free flash drive. Hey, plug it in your computer, and boom, it automatically installs the malicious software on your system, and probably does it silently so you don't even know it. You just think you came up and got a free flash drive. Impersonation is when an attacker pretends to be someone they're not. So they call you pretending to be from the help desk. Hey, this is the help desk call, and we got to, had an alert saying that there's a critical issue on your system. We need to be able to remote into your system to change that up and to fix your user account. But I'm going to need your username and password in order to do that. So they're pretending to be a trusted source, like a help desk technician, but the whole goal is to get some sensitive info from you. Tailgate. This is an attack against physical security. So most of the stuff we've been talking about is attacks against technical security, or some type of technical control, something technology based. Tailgating is like, I'm actually trying to come up in your building. So that's when somebody, let's say you got a security door that requires like you to badge in or something like that. That's when the person's coming in, the authorized person scans into the door, and the unauthorized person, you see this in the movies all the time, right before the door closes, the person is trying to sneak in, they grab the door, and then they get in too. So you're basically following an unauthorized person into a secure area. Shoulder surfing, again, real low tech but effective, is just looking over somebody's shoulder to steal their information. Like, say for example, if they're typing in their PIN number at an ATM. That's why it's good etiquette to stand. I stand like way back from people when they're at the ATM. Let them know I'm not trying to see your PIN number. But how uncomfortable would you be if somebody was like right up on your back when you're trying to put in your code to get in the ATM? Be like, excuse me. But people do it on computers too. They might be walking past your desk, you're typing information into your computer, and they're just kind of peeking over to see what you're typing. And then dumpster diving. This is going through somebody's trash looking for confidential information, because in most cases, once that trash hit the curb, it no longer belongs to you. So really, it's a legal way of getting information. And then if you're doing this for individuals, you can get a lot of information, but even more so if you have a company who's not disposing of their information properly by shredding it, you can find all types of data by going through their trash. And it won't be illegal either. So to protect against social engineering, the biggest protection is going to be user education. You got to teach your users what to look out for. That's why most companies have a security awareness training program where they actually have yearly or quarterly lessons that they give to people to make sure that they're aware of the type of attacks that are out there. Some other things you can do to protect yourself, though, include destroy confidential destroy confidential information according to your organization's policy. So like shredding and things like that, that protects against dumpster diving. Never give up your username and password credentials to anyone. That protects against, several forms of social engineering. Never leave your username and password anywhere where somebody can easily find them. That helps with shoulder surfing. That helps with, again, other easy ways that people could pick off your information. Never open emails from untrusted sources. That helps with spam and phishing and Trojan horses and a bunch of other technical ones. Never release work-related information on social media. That's actually a big issue now. Social media, people give up too much information on social media platforms, and even though that one post might not be incriminating or might not give away a lot of information, if the attacker is doing reconnaissance on your information, on your organization, they might be able to they create what they call an aggregate. They take all your social posts and they start to piece it together like it's a puzzle. Or they'll also look at social media posts from other people in your organizations. Yeah, you might have said something, but these other 5 people also said something. And if I put all those clues together, then that might give me a picture of something that I can exploit later on. Never reuse work-related passwords. So reusing passwords potentially gives away what they call the keys to the kingdom. Because if that one password gets compromised, a good attacker will know, hey, let me try that one password on other systems that I know this person has access to. And I might be able to get into those too. Always lock your sign out when you lock or sign out from your computer when it's unattended. So you walk away from your computer, even if for like a minute or two. That minute or two could be long enough for somebody to hop on your system and look at some information, look at what's currently on your screen. So if you ever step away from your system, lock it before you leave. And then always report suspicious individuals. You see anybody like lurking, trying to ask somebody to badge them into a building, that could be an issue. Let somebody know. Security procedures. Your security policies. This is going to be something that's created by probably the people who run your organization or your IT program or what have you, to your higher ups. They'll come up with a policy, and that policy is like the overarching 10,000-foot view for how you'll deal with security in your organization. Um, um, there are going to be different policies that address, networking, data, and address other different technical aspects. But these are some of the questions that you'll ask when creating that policy. Once those policies are set up, they'll cover a bunch of different things. Here's some examples of different security policies: password policy, acceptable use, remote access. And then each one of these policies will have your organization's stance on how those different topics should be addressed. It'll be your job as the IT, as an IT staff member, to help enforce those policies. And you have to work by those policies too, but you'll be helping with the enforcement part as well. All right, these are some of the key ones. Identification and access policy. This outlines verification procedures and specifies authorized persons that can have access to your network resources. So this policy outlines who can get into what. This is your access. This is actually the basis of your access control list. So you'll have a policy that says these people can get to certain resources. The way that you as a technician will enforce that policy is by creating access control lists. That's what we refer to as a technical control. Your controls will help enforce policies. Same thing with a password policy. Password policy might say that these are the minimum requirements for how a password should be set up. But that policy is nothing but a sheet of paper with a bunch of words on it. The way that we enforce the policy is, it's almost like laws, right? A law might say something, but how do you enforce that law? You got to have some mechanism to, make people follow that law. So your password. All right. So the acceptable use policy, this is going to outline what someone is able to do on systems or on a network of an organization, or even like what they can do with their email and things like that. And it's also another important part about policies is that they don't only set out what you're able to do, they also outline what the consequences are if you don't follow the policy. That's a really important part of it, because they can say, you're allowed to do this all day long, but if there's no repercussions for not following the policy, then if you violate the policy and you haven't stated clearly what happens after the violation, then the company doesn't have anything that they can really do. So these policies are also going to say, okay, this is what's going to happen to you if you don't follow. And then it'll be up to the technical folks, to implement a solution to help enforce that policy. Next is the remote access policy. That remote access policy is going to outline how a user is able to remotely access the network and what they're able to do when they remotely access the network. Network maintenance policies specify network device operating systems and end-user application update procedures. And then the incident handling policy is going to outline what happens or what should happen when there's a incident in the organization, a security incident. So that's going to outline, what's the plan of action if we get breached. Excuse me. Securing devices and data. The goal of all these security policies is to give you a safe working environment. An organization's assets, including their data, their employees, and their physical devices, such as computers and networks, are going to be protected because of these different policies. And then the security policy should identify hardware and equipment that can be used to prevent theft, vandalism, and data loss. So in that policy, they might touch on different, technologies that can be implemented, but they may not. That might be something that they leave up to the technical folks to figure out when they're figuring out the what solutions to put in place. But in some cases, they might even define that, okay, we're going to use this specific technology to protect that. Your other areas of security that you have to protect, in addition to like the technical stuff, are going to be physical security. It's like your first line of defense. Physical security is going to be important, as important as data security, because in most cases, if you can get physical access to something, all of the technical stuff that you put in place can be overwritten. If I can physically get to the equipment, then it doesn't matter how many like passwords you put on your system, because I can get physically to the device. Physical security involves securing access to the organization's premises, like buildings or even the lot, access to restricted areas, and the computing and network access to the computing and network infrastructure. To enforce physical security, first we're going to have a policy that talks about, physical security, but then to back up those policies, we're going to have actual different solutions. So protecting physical security, one of the main solutions you're going to use are different kinds of locks. You have your conventional lock, which is, basic lock with a key and a door handle. You have your deadbolt that's going to, add on to the lock and key, and it's going to add a bolt to reinforce the door. You might have electronic locks that have you put a PIN code in. There's also token-based locks like proximity readers or smart card readers, where you have to have a token with you, some type of issue thing. Could be a card, a badge, or what have you. You have to have that, and then you let the token reader read that token so it can grant you access. You might also have biometric locks. Those are ones that are going to read something about you as a person, like a thumbprint or a retina scan, in order to let you in. And then you might have multi-factor locks. That's going to combine those, two or more of those things. Usually just two. Any more than two is like overkill. So this one they have pictured here is a biometric that requires a fingerprint scan and a PIN number. In order for it to be multi-factor, remember that it has to combine two things that aren't the same, right? Not that aren't of the same type. So it can't just be two things, a PIN number and a passcode. It has to be like something you are, that's like a biometric, and something like a PIN number, or something you have and something you are. Maybe a fingerprint scan and a proximity card. Another device that protects physical access is a man trap. A man trap is a series of doors that have a small room inside of them, in between them rather. That small room usually has a pressure sensor in the floor. So what happens is you come into that room, the door locks behind you, but before the door in front of you that really lets you into the facility fully unlocks, somebody has to check you out on a camera, and the pressure sensor has to indicate that there's only one person in it. And then you're released into the next door and allowed into the secure area. In some cases, maybe there's not a pressurized floor there. Sometimes there'll be like a guard in that middle area who checks you out and then lets you through to the next door. But there could be a couple of different ways that works. The main thing is that there's a room in between the two doors before you get to the secure area. And the purpose of that is to prevent tailgating. Somebody can't follow you in because you're being watched, or there's a pressure sensor in the floor that can sense if it's more than one person. Securing the computer hardware, securing computers and network hardware. Organizations have to protect their infrastructure, their computer and network infrastructure as well. This is going to include all of the cabling, the telecom equipment, and the networking devices. So there's going to be several different methods of physically protecting that equipment that you're going to implement as part of your security strategy. Some of the factors that determine the most effective equipment to use to secure your infrastructure is going to be to look at first how the equipment is being used, where the computer equipment is located, and see what type of user access to data is required. So the example they're giving here is a computer is in a busy public place and it requires additional protection from theft and vandalism. In a busy call center, a server may be needed to need to be secure and locked in an equipment room because there's a lot of people going in and out of there. Or another environment where you might need to consider these things is when you're using a laptop in a public area, a security dongle or a key fob to ensure that the computer locks if the user of the laptop is using a laptop is separated might be something that you need. Data, the greatest asset. So we talk a lot about securing like technology and facilities, but the biggest asset that any organization has is the data that they collect. The PII, the personally identifiable information, the credit card data, all of that stuff is money to them. Think about a sales organization or a company that handles, again, credit card information, or even like a hospital who has all of this sensitive personal records of people. That data that they're storing is like a big deal. And if it gets compromised, that can really damage their organization's reputation, maybe even to the point of them like getting fined or going out of business. So data can be lost or damaged in many circumstances. It could be theft, it could be equipment failure, or there can be some type of disaster. People try to steal data all the time and send it off to other locations. A lot of times that's the reason why organizations get hacked, is in an attempt to steal their data and exfiltrate it. That means siphon it off and send it somewhere else, or maybe even just leak it to the public. So you need to protect that data. Some of the ways you can protect the data is by backing it up. That'll protect it against getting just destroyed and becoming unrecoverable. You can encrypt it. That keeps unauthorized eyes off of it because they won't be able to undo the encryption. And you can set permissions on it. So that's even protecting you from internal users who are just, who might casually, maybe not even maliciously try to look at things that they're not supposed to see. Having the right sets of permissions on data will keep it only available to folks who need to see it. Data backups are super important because, again, they're like your number one protection against data loss. Something happens to the data on the system where it's completely unrecoverable. At least you have your backups that you can revert back to. They might not be like up to the minute, but it's better than losing everything and not being able to get back. In a Windows system on an individual computer, remember we have our backup and restore utility. On Macs, you have the time machine utility, and then on Linux is a bunch of tools that you can download to do your system backups. From a permissions perspective, the way that we control access to files and directories that are locally on the operating system is by providing file and folder level permissions. We mentioned share permissions already, but those are only permissions that we assign to data that's on a network location that we're sharing with other people. If I'm accessing data on an individual system, there's a whole another set of permissions called these file and folder permissions. If it's a Windows system, which is depicted here, those permissions are called NTFS permissions because that's the file system that Windows 10 uses. Those permissions are read, which is read only. If I give that permission, all the person can do is read the file or read through the file or read the document, read the file itself. Write allows them to make changes to it. Modify allows them to make changes and delete it if they want to. Read and execute allows them to read and run the file if it's a program. And then full control lets them do everything all the other permissions can do Plus, they can assign permissions to other people. So based on what the user needs to do with that file or directory, they should be given, one or more of these permissions, and we can control what people are able to do by using these permissions I say in tandem with the share permissions. There's also file and folder encryption. So not only can you encrypt your entire hard drive with BitLocker, you can also encrypt specific files and folders to basically password protect them. The encryption will come with a password, but it'll also run that particular file or folder data through a mathematical problem, an algorithm to make it unreadable, to scramble it into ciphertext. And unless you know the key to decrypt that file or folder, you won't be able to read it. In Windows, they refer to this as EFS, or encrypted file system. I mentioned BitLocker. We talked about it earlier, but again, BitLocker does the full disk encryption. In order for BitLocker to actually work, though, it's not just a software thing. You also have to have the right hardware. There's a hardware component that you'll see on motherboards called a TPM chip, Trusted Platform Module. This has to be enabled in the BIOS. First, the chip has to be on the motherboard. Then it has to be enabled in the BIOS, because this is where your key for your BitLocker gets stored. You don't actually have to, download the BitLocker key. Your BitLocker key can be stored automatically on that TPM chip, and then what happens is once that key is stored on the chip, it makes that computer and that hard drive inseparable. The minute somebody tries to take that hard drive out of the computer and plug it into another one to read it, the hard drive will say, "Okay, what's the key to unlock it? Unlock it." That key is on that other computer, so you won't be able to read it unless you put that hard drive back into that main computer, and then hopefully you have other protections in place, layered security, like passwords and things like that, to prevent somebody from getting access to that hard drive when it's in the computer it's supposed to be in. So at that point, their only alternative is to wipe the drive, and then you basically protected your data. You're out of the computer, but your data's protected. Data wiping of magnetic media. This is a technique that you can use to, again, eliminate or remove information permanently from a hard drive. There's data wiping software that can wipe and overwrite multiple times on a hard drive to clear any information off. If you're using like a standard type hard drive that uses electromagnetism in order to record its information, you can wipe the hard drive using a degaussing wand, which is basically like a really powerful magnet that you run past the hard drive. And then because the data is stored with electromagnetism, it messes up the electromagnetism and it clears the drive. And then the last one is degaussing, which again does the same thing. It's using a high-powered magnet to clear all of the data off of a magnetic hard drive. None of this works though on a solid-state drive. This is only for magnetic media, like tapes and kind of standard hard disk drives. For SSD is a little bit different. The common techniques used for erasing data, such as degaussing, aren't effective on flash memory because it doesn't use electromagnetism. To perform a full erase of SSDs, you're gonna have to use software to pull it off, or you gotta physically destroy the media. So you gotta burn it, or actually break it up with a hammer or a drill or something like that to make it unrecoverable. But if you do want to reuse it, you just want to wipe it, you can use software to wipe and destroy the data that's on it. If you have to physically destroy that drive, a couple different ways you can do it. You can crack it with a hammer. You can incinerate it. Some organizations use a drill to drill down through through the drive and physically destroy it, make it unrecoverable. But if you're planning on reusing it, then you have to do either a low level formatting where you basically wipe it and reformat it several times in order to overwrite the data enough that you can't recover it. And there's also a standard formatting, which does a high level format, and it doesn't get to every little bit of the data, but it does overwrite the hard drive enough to make it hard to recover. All right, 13.3, securing Windows workstations. All right, computers and workstations should be secured from theft. One way you can secure them is by locking the workstation when you're not by it. So we mentioned that before. Step away from your computer. You do a Windows lock, Windows key and the L key, now to lock the system so that nobody can just hop on it and start looking through your files. If you have to walk away from your computer and it's in an open public area, there's these things called cable locks, which are kind of like a bike chain for your computer, and you can physically lock down your laptop to a surface so that somebody will actually have to cut the chain or cause a ruckus to try to get the computer up. There are also these things called privacy screens, which help prevent against shoulder surfing, because what it'll do is it'll obscure the video output of your monitor unless you're sitting directly in front of it. So like if somebody's off to the side, off to an angle or over top, they won't be able to read your screen. You have to be sitting directly in front of the screen in order for a privacy filter to allow you to see through it. To access your computer, your computer must also be protected from a technical perspective by using things like passwords, of course. And you're going to have different types of passwords. You should have a password to protect your BIOS. So if somebody wants to get into your hardware configurations, you should have a hardware password, and that prevents unauthorized access to your hardware configurations in the BIOS. You should have a login password too. So if you have a local user account, like an administrator's account or something for that individual machine, that should be password protected. And then let's say your computers are part of a domain, like a network, and you've been issued a username and password for your network, you should have a password protecting that too. This is an example of the BIOS password. Again, I press the F12 or F2 key, whatever, to try to get into the hardware settings for BIOS or the UEFI. I should be prompted for a password before it lets me in. So that's going to keep people from accessing your hardware configurations. For your regular login, you got a couple of options for your local accounts in Windows. You can use a Windows Hello feature, which will basically let you use a biometric to log into your system. And that biometric can be facial recognition, or a fingerprint scan. You can use a PIN number, which is like short 4 to 6 characters that you put in. That PIN number is usually tied to a password. You'll put the password in, but then you'll say, I'm going to use this PIN number, so I don't have to type my password all the time. You can use a picture password, which you'll choose a picture and a gesture to use to in combination to get access to the system. Or you can use a dynamic lock. This feature makes Windows lock when a prepared device, such as a cell phone, goes out of range. So let's say you have your phone in your pocket. As long as you're in range with your phone, the computer is unlocked. You walk away from your computer automatically locks because it doesn't sense your phone there anymore. Local passwords can be created for standalone Windows computers. So you can go to the control panel to do that. We saw how to create those user accounts earlier in our chapter on Windows operating system. But you'll go to the control panel and the user accounts, and then you're able to create your own account and give it a password there. All your versions of Windows will have that ability for creating user accounts. And then they also have the ability to create what they call screensavers. And that screensaver is what shows up on your screen when the screen locks. And that's just another way of, you can put that on a timer that says, okay, after a certain amount of time of inactivity, lock my screen. Passwords are like our number one most common ways of protecting access to our systems. Passwords should be complex, which means that they have, a minimum length, a variety of characters, like uppercase, lowercase letters, numbers, and special symbols. Lengthwise, they should be at least 8 characters long, because the longer the password is, the harder it is to guess or crack with software. You don't make it too long, though. If you make it too long, then your users will be tempted to write them down. So just long enough to make it hard to guess, but not so long that people are going to write it down. You should have a variety of passwords, which means, again, you're not giving away the keys of the kingdom. You're not using the same password for everything. You should switch it up. That way, if one of the passwords gets compromised, all your systems aren't compromised. And then password expiration is important. You want the password not to last forever, because if it does get compromised, then if it lasts forever, then that's an unlimited amount of time that an attacker has to get into your systems. But if you have a password expiration of like 30, 60 days, then yeah, they might have access for a while, but eventually they'll lose access when the password changes. In your operating system, you'll have, in Windows at least, you'll have something called local security policies. This is where you go to adjust those settings that we just talked about. Password complexity, lockout policy. All of those things are settings that you can create in your local security policy for a standalone computer. If your computer is part of a domain that uses like Active Directory, which means is in that client server architecture, then you won't use the local policy to do that. You'll use something called group policy, and your systems administrators will create the group policy for that organization's passwords based on whatever the security policy is that they got from their higher ups. They'll create these group policies, and those group policies will get pushed down to all of the client systems. But if this is a standalone computer, you go to that local security policy, and you have basically the same type of options, but you just have to do it per system. You get to the local security policy by going to control panel. So I'll go there. Control panel. Then you go to your administrative tools here, and then you'll go to local security policy. And under that local security policy, you see that there's a accounts policy folder, and then there's a password policy folder. So I can click there, and this will show me all the password policies that are currently there. So right now I got, maximum password age, 42 days. Minimum password age, that can be set. But you see all the complexity, and you see all the different options that are available, and you can go into one of those and you can tweak the settings. So that's Windows 7 and Vista have that, but that's also available in Windows 10. You can launch the same tool by just typing secpol.msc, and that'll open up the tool that I just looked at. Account policy settings. The two main areas that you want to look at are the ones I just kind of alluded to. They're both underneath of that account policies folder, if you will, in the local security policies. But one group of settings is called password policies, and the other group of settings is the account lockout policies. The password policies control all of those different password features we just talked about, complexity, age of the password, things like that. The account lockout policies control what happens if somebody tries to do a brute force attack on your password. They try to guess your password too many times. How many times are you going to allow a bad password to be used before you lock out the account? If you lock out the account, how long is it going to be locked out? You know, a day, couple hours, or until the admin comes and unlocks it. All of those settings are underneath the account lockout policy, but they kind of go hand in hand with the password policy. So this is just an example of that. Another policy that you can adjust under these local group policies are your audit policies. The audit policies will track different audit characteristics. So, for example, you can audit account log on events. So here, if I click that one, I can say I want to audit successful and failure logins, or just I want to audit the failures. So that way, every time a failed login happens on my system, it'll make a note of it. It'll record it in a log for me. And then there's a bunch of other audit things, but all of these audits, again, they're creating log files so that I can monitor my system and monitor the security of it. To export that log file, after I've created it, or export these local security settings rather, after I've created them, you can go to the Action Center and then say Export List, and that'll export them into a INF file, and then they can be imported into another computer. So this will be like if I'm in a work group environment where I don't have centralized management, but I want everybody's computer to have these same settings, I can just make them once on one computer, export them, and then import them onto the other systems. All right, to maintain accounts, when maintaining accounts, there's a couple different scenarios that you'll be dealing with when we're maintaining user accounts. You'll have different scenarios. You'll have, the scenario where somebody had an authorized account, but now they don't work with the organization anymore. So the way that I would handle it, the way that you should handle their user access is to not delete the account straight out. Instead, you'll disable their user account. That way, if they have, files or things that you might need later on, but you don't really know about them right now, if the account is disabled, you can re-enable it and get back into their account. You just change the password if you're the admin. But if the minute you delete that account, everything that belonged to that account also goes with it. So it's always kind of like a best practice to just disable it so you can at least have future access to it if you need it. And the disabling will normally be like, it'll be like a clock. You'll be like, okay, we're going to keep it disabled for 3 months. We're not going to keep it disabled forever. We'll keep it disabled for 3 months. And if in 3 months, you don't need something out of that account, then it's good to go ahead and delete it. Another way to approach that too is just to just change the login credentials. But I prefer to disable it. And well, you can disable it and change the login credentials too. Guest accounts should be are special types of accounts for temps or actual guests. So don't confuse this with like the guest account that's built into your operating system, into Windows. That guest account doesn't require any login credentials. That guest account should be disabled. Don't ever use that one. But these guest accounts are like temporary accounts. Like, for example, you have somebody you had a temp that's going to be working with the company for like 2 or 3 months. You created an account for them so that they can get access to resources in the environment, and you maybe give them an email or something like that. But when they leave, you want to be able to disable their account. Again, similar to terminating an employee, disable their account and disable their privileges so that they can't get back in after the guest access has expired. Track login times. So if all employees are logging in during a specified hours, you want to be able to block when block off that time period. So within actually your user settings, there's a configuration where you can do that. You can say that this login is only allowed to log in between these hours. And if it's outside of those hours, even though they have a valid login, their login won't work. Log failed attempts. We just saw that a second ago, where you can set up an audit on your system, where every time a failed attempt is occurs on that system, it'll make a log entry so that you know. And then idle timeout and screen lock, you can configure the idle timer in order to automatically log a user out or lock their screen if the system's been idle for too long. Some other management tools that we've talked about previously are user access control and then the local user and group manager. To get to the UAC, you go to control panel, user accounts, and then manage another account. Here you can add and remove and change attributes for individual users. And when you're logged in as an admin, you can adjust how sensitive UAC is. Does it only ask them for authorization, when certain things happen, or do I increase the sensitivity all the way up, or do I turn the sensitivity off? So you can make adjustments per user account for UAC. It's not like an across the board change. It's a per user change. And then for local users and group manager, you go to control panel, administrative tools, computer management, local users and groups. We saw this tool earlier too. This is that advanced tool that lets you create users and groups with more details than the regular standard user account tool allowed. And we looked at both of these already. If you're in an environment that uses Active Directory, basically if you're in a domain environment, you're not setting up accounts for an individual system. You're setting up accounts on a server that manages all of the users and other objects in your network, your domain. Then the place that you'll go to create user accounts and computer accounts is Active Directory, that Active Directory database. Within Active Directory, you'll use a tool called Active Directory Users and Computers. And that Active Directory Users and Computers tools will show you these organizational units, or OUs, that house all of the different users and groups in your system. From there, if I want to create a brand new user account, I'll just go to the users organizational unit and say new. And it'll allow me to create a user account with a similar setup as we saw when we were looking at the computer management's user tool. And then same thing for groups. If I want to create a group within Active Directory, I'll go to the group folder and I'll say, okay, create this group. It'll launch a tool similar to what you see on the local group creation tool that we access through computer management. Firewalls. We discussed firewalls in the networking section, but those firewalls don't necessarily have to be hardware-based firewalls. They can also be software-based firewalls. These software firewalls, as a matter of fact, there's a software firewall that's built into your Windows operating system. It's called Windows Defender. And that type of firewall is a host-based firewall. Host meaning it resides on your host computer. It's not like a separate piece of hardware that you plug into your network. Every Windows operating system has this host-based firewall installed on it. It's just a matter of turning it on and configuring it. If you don't have any antivirus, like third-party antivirus on your system, that host-based firewall is on by default if Windows Defender is also the antivirus for your computer. You can pull up Windows Defender. You can do a search for it. You say Windows Defender, and here's the firewall right here, Windows Defender firewall. And then here's the firewall setting. Mine's turned on. If I want to see and configure it, I can say advanced settings. And then here's my Windows Defender firewall. I can control inbound traffic, and I can set rules for that. I can control outbound network traffic, and I can set rules for that. Check the I can create a connection security rule here, and I can look at my different monitors here: the firewall monitor, connection monitor, security associations. So there's a lot of stuff in there, but all this firewall is built into the operating system, and it's software based. SOHO, small office, home office networks, are networks that are going to use probably their router to implement, though they have these all-in-one routers that can implement some of this functionality in terms of firewall. So that might be another layer of firewall you can add to your network by using the built-in firewall that's in your integrated router, your SOHO router. And then if you're a company, a lot of times you'll have, again, a dedicated tool that handles that for you. So small to mid-sized organizations might have a network-based firewall, an actual appliance that has the firewall functionality, and it can filter traffic. Some examples they gave here are Cisco's Adaptive Security Appliance, ASA, and Cisco's Integrated Service Router, or ISR. So for your software-based firewalls, again, they're going to deny and allow traffic. I just showed you an example of the one in Windows 10. To get to it, you can go to control panel Windows Firewall, or you can just search for it the way I did, and you'll create those allow and deny options by making rules, and those rules will block certain types of traffic based on different criteria. It could be based on IP address or port number or what have you. So talked about that already. You can disable that firewall if you want to. Sometimes if you download, if you have installed different types of anti-malware software that have their own firewall, they'll automatically disable the Windows firewall because you have something else to protect it. But if you don't have anything, having that Windows firewall is better than not being protected. This is just going more into some of the functionality of firewall. You can look through that on your own to play around with it. That's the best way to learn any of these software tools. For web-based security, your web browsers are not only used for web browsing, they're also now used to run other applications like Office 365 and Google Docs. So in order to protect them, you want to make sure that you have some type of web-based security in place. This can be accomplished by downloading specific plugins that protect you while you're browsing the internet. A lot of your again, anti-malware software, they come with some type of web browser protection. An example of that is in private browsing. So web browsers, not in private browsing. Sorry. One example of that will be like the Chrome browser protection, or if you have like Norton's or McAfee, they have a specific part of their anti-malware solution that's dedicated to browser protection. The in private browsing is a way of somewhat hiding your identity when you're surfing the internet. This comes in handy if you're using a public computer or using a public or using the internet in a public area, like an open Wi-Fi, something to that effect. Because what it does is it prevents the computer from holding on to your browsing history, from holding on to the cookies, the search, the anything related to your searches, even your password. It won't prompt you for, to save your password, things like that. In Internet Explorer 11, to get to that in private browsing, you go to the tools menu and you'll activate in private browsing. But other browsers like Chrome, they have similar features as well. A pop-up blocker is a tool that you'll also see in your browsers to prevent unauthorized pop-up ads that could potentially be things like spam or malware trying to get you to click on something. In Internet Explorer, you go to Tools, Pop-up Blocker, and then you'll turn the pop-up blocker on to disable it. But again, other browsers have their own ways of disabling those pop-ups. Smart filtering is a tool that lets you save protected media licenses to your device. If you turn that feature on, it can also filter other types of web-based content. So you'll just have to toggle on those different features. This is part of your Windows Defender. So you only be able to use this if you're using Windows Defender for one. And then if you're using a Microsoft-based web browser like Edge or Internet Explorer. ActiveX filtering is a protection against scripts, malicious scripts potentially running on your system and trying to control your system. So ActiveX is a tool or a software tool that provides interactivity on websites. ActiveX, however, is very prone to being abused in malicious software. So because of that, a lot of browsers are starting to block ActiveX from running. So you can do that in your browser. You can turn off ActiveX, prevent it from running, because by doing that, you decrease the chance of a malicious script running and installing some type of malware on your computer just by you visiting a website. That type of attack, by the way, is called a drive-by attack. You just visit a website, and once you visit the site, something like ActiveX runs a script that installs something or changes some configuration on your computer, and all you did was visit the site. Again, to protect against that, you can stop ActiveX from running. Restrictive settings. Devices often come with security features that are not enabled, or the security feature uses some type of default settings, which is bad, because default settings are like common knowledge. Like you could Google search for default settings for some solutions, and then it'll just have right online. It'll have the usernames and passwords and whatever the settings are. So you want to change those. So many devices to combat that. A lot of devices now ship with the most restrictive settings that they possibly can have. So you got to kind of figure out what settings you actually need so that you can loosen the restrictions to allow you to use the device, but not loosen them so much that you kind of defeat the purpose of the having those security settings there in the first place. Disable autoplay. So one feature that is there for kind of like might be enabled on systems for like to make it more user friendly is the autoplay feature, which basically lets you plug in a flash drive or put a DVD in, and it'll just run it automatically by reading a configuration file called autorun.inf. But this can be an issue. Again, when we talked about rubber duckies, about flash drives just being left in the parking lot, you pick that flash drive up and plug it in, and it auto runs, which could lead to malware installing itself. By disabling that autoplay feature, you prevent people from being able to just plug something in or put in a disk in and then it running automatically and installing itself. You go to control panel and autoplay window, and then from there you're able to shut that feature down. And last part of this section, we talked about patches already. Patches are those software updates that come out on a regular basis. You'll need to patch your operating system and any other software and drivers that are used on your computer. The best way to get your patches for a Windows operating system is through Windows Update. And the cool thing about Windows Update and Windows 10, for software that have been vetted, they also include those software updates with your Windows updates, and driver updates too. A lot of driver updates are also included in the regular Windows updates. So it's kind of like one-stop shopping. Do those updates and you get a bunch of other stuff updated at the same time. All right, configuring wireless security. The common, one of the common things that you'll need to do when you're setting up your wireless security is figure out what type of encryption you're going to be using. That's going to be a big requirement because, again, these signals are traveling through the air, so they're a little bit easier for somebody to intercept than, say, your wired network signals, where they might have to tap into a wire in order to do that. Here, they can just grab your signals out of the air. So it's like a must that they need to be encrypted in order to protect your data if it's intercepted. The following technologies help to accomplish that task: hash encoding, symmetric encryption, and asymmetric encryption. Hash encoding is a protection against the integrity of data. So in security, you're always trying to protect one or more of these three things: confidentiality, integrity, or availability. We call it the CIA triad. Confidentiality means that I'm going to make sure that only people who are able to see, who are supposed to be able to get access and see something, are able to get access to it. Integrity means that there's going to be no unauthorized changes to that whatever. And then availability means I can get to it when I need to get to it. So here, integrity, we're trying to make sure that only changes that are authorized can be made to any of that data that's flowing through this wireless network. Hashing helps enforce integrity by creating it's sort of like it is an encryption, but it's not like your typical encryption. Normally when we use encryption, it's to protect the data so that later on it can be unencrypted and read. So there's an encryption and a decryption process. Hashing is different. Hashing is only one directional. You only encrypt, and you end up with what they call a hash, which is that encoded data. The purpose of the hash is not to later on decrypt it, because you can't undo a hash. The purpose is to see if anything's changed in the data. Because what should happen is I should be able to take some data, message, run it through a hashing algorithm, and end up with a string of characters. I should be able to take that same exact data that hasn't been altered, run it through that same algorithm again, and get the same exact string of characters. If I run my message through the hashing algorithm and I end up with a different string of characters, that means somebody's tampered with my data and I can't trust it anymore. So the hashing algorithm protects integrity because it gives you an indicator of whether or not data has been tampered with, even a little bit. Because a super small change in data will cause a big change in a hashing algorithm. So that's one way you protect your data. You protect the integrity of your data doing wireless communications. Symmetric and asymmetric encryption actually protect the data itself, because it's going to encrypt the message until it gets to the other side where it can be decrypted by an authorized user. So these are confidentiality protections, making sure that only the person who's supposed to have access to it can read the data. They just take two different approaches. With symmetric encryption, the encryption key is the same on both sides. So this is an example where you would have, let's say, a pre-shared key. I got I have a Wi-Fi password at my house. If I want somebody to get on the Wi-Fi, I share that Wi-Fi password with them. They have that key now to unlock the encryption. Now we can communicate. Excuse me. Now we can communicate wirelessly over that network. Or I'm trying to send them a message, right? And I encrypt the message with this one key, and they receive the message and they unencrypt it with that same key. We're using the same key to unencrypt and to encrypt and decrypt the data. Versus asymmetric. Asymmetric encryption is different on each side. There's one key that I can give out to random people who want to communicate with me. That's called the public key. Then there's another key called a private key that only I keep on my system, and I use that to unlock all of those public keys. Those keys are mathematically matched, so the private key and the public key only work with each other, but I'm the only one who will ever have that private key or should ever have that private key. So in that way, the people who are sending me message can be reassured that I'm the only one that's reading them. And then when I send a message to them, I'll probably have their public key and they'll have a private key, and I can be assured that my message is only going to be read by that individual because they should be the only one with the key to unlock it. SSID in wireless networks is basically the name of your wireless network. There's a couple of protections for that. Some people disable the broadcast of the SSID, but that's not really security. That's something they refer to as security through obscurity, like you try to hide it in order to make it secure, but that really doesn't work. A better security is to have one of those protections like encryption and passwords on your wireless network versus just hiding the name of it. But if you did hide the name, the only way that you'd be able to connect to that wireless network would be to already know in advance what the name of the wireless network is, or what the SSID of the wireless network is. Typically, though, your wireless network, your SSID is broadcast, and if somebody wants to connect to it, they can scan for nearby wireless networks. But as long as you have encryption turned on, the minute they try to connect, they'll be prompted for a key. They'll be prompted for a password in order to connect. So these are authentication methods. If we have that shared key method for authentication, well, first of all, let's look at the diagram. If we have open authentication, somebody wants to authenticate, they go to an open network, they just connect. They're on the network. It doesn't require any passwords or anything like that because it's open. So this is like your free Wi-Fi at McDonald's. Versus a shared key authentication, they go to connect. They connect to that SSID. It prompts them for a key. Everybody's using the same key. They type that key in, and then they get access. There's 3 different kinds of shared key encryption. WEP, WPA, and WPA2. We mentioned those earlier. WEP is insecure. Don't use that. That algorithm has been cracked. I've seen WEP keys get cracked in real time, like they're typing it, and as they're typing it, is a software program cracking the data. WPA2. WPA was a transitional technology, but it's been cracked as well. So the latest and greatest, and the one that you should be using, is WPA2. That still has uncracked encryption. And actually it uses AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, and that's the same encryption standard that the NSA has approved for encrypting their data. So NSA, National Security Agency, that's what the NSA encrypts their stuff with. So it's pretty powerful. On your wireless router, you can enable those different types of security by going into the wireless configuration settings. So this is for just one particular router. This is a Linksys router, but every wireless router is going to have a place where you can go in and make that configuration change. Another place that you can set up security and make it easier for you to connect to your computer to a wireless network is by using a Wi-Fi protected setup button. WPS button usually has an icon of two arrows pointing to each other in a circle. It's a cool tool to use. It makes it a little bit easier to set up network connectivity for people who are non-technical. Like I set up my my stepmom's Wi-Fi. I told her to hit that button and turn on her computer and scan for the network. And basically behind the scenes, the router and the computer help themselves to set up the wireless network. So she didn't have to type in no codes or nothing. Problem with this is it shouldn't be left on because it makes it too easy for some random person who can get physical access to your wireless router to just push a button and then connect their device. So if you do use it, make sure you disable that feature after you've used it. Your devices, your security devices, just like any other software, they need to be updated. Your wireless router is going to have software on it called firmware. That's the software that tells that hardware how to work, and that's going to need to be updated. So just like you check for updates on your operating system or on your software applications, you need to check for updates, firmware updates for all of your hardware to make sure that it's patched and has the best security and the best features. Your hardware firewalls will need to be patched too. They're going to have updates. They're going to need to be configured. We talked about configuring firewalls already. From a software perspective, the same type of rules apply to hardware firewalls, and some of your wireless devices have these same firewalls built into them, just like your wired routers had. So you can go in there and adjust the firewall settings even on a wireless router. Port forward and port triggering. These are two security tools that kind of go hand in hand with your firewall. They allow different network traffic to be sent over to be quarantined, if you will. So if it's noticing certain types of traffic trying to go over, trying to avoid ports that you've blocked by going to different ports, then that could potentially trigger some type of action on the router that can shut down that activity, and again prevent somebody from sidestepping your port-based security rules on your firewall. And then universal plug and play means that you just plug something in and it automatically works. This is the type of feature that you want to turn off because you don't want anybody just plugging things in and having them automatically work. In some areas where that might be effective to disable that will be in reference to port forwarding will be for like things like streaming media, game hosting, and providing services to other small business devices. We don't necessarily want them self-configuring, or if you do allow them to self-configure, you disable that, sort of like WPS, you disable that feature after you use it. All right, so basic troubleshooting, again, are 6 steps. Go ahead through the tool in Netacad to see how to apply those troubleshooting techniques. Let's